With Kang the Conqueror becoming a very hotly discussed villain as of recently, we figured we'd give you some tidbits about the guy that you should probably know if you don't already. So, here they are. At number 10 is that Kang is a time traveler from the 30th century. This fact is pretty obvious to those who know the character, but it's worth mentioning because it explains a lot about how Kang has gained such an insane power level, and how he's so omnipotent. It might also explain how good Kang is at time travel, having existed in multiple different times throughout history. One of his most notable personas throughout history was Rama Tut in ancient Egypt, but it doesn't end there. Kang is known to have mastered time travel to such an insane degree that he has appeared in every single century at one point or another. This is part of why he has that suffix on his name, The Conqueror, because his goal is to conquer every era in the history of the world. At number 9 is that his first love, Ravonna, actually sacrificed herself to save him. During the 40th century, Kang meets a rebellion from the people whose kingdom he's conquering at the time, and one of the rebels is Ravonna, a woman that Kang had grown feelings for. But when his commanders urge him to execute her, Kang can't bring himself to do it. This eventually causes an uprising, leading to someone taking a shot at Kang. But Ravonna gets in the way of it, jumping in front of Kang and sacrificing herself to save him. This is one of the few times we see Kang the Conqueror show love for anything other than conquering, and also one of the few times we see his plan fall off the rails to such a detrimental degree. I mean, hey, love is a powerful thing. At number 8 is that Kang will eventually become Immortus. Since Kang sort of exists in every time period all at once, we already know what his future holds. And we've seen that in his future, he will eventually become the Time Lord known as Immortus. Way down the line, it is known that Kang will grow tired of feeling the pain of loss and suffering through his conquest, and he'll decide to reside in the temporal limbo dimension. Serving as the Timekeeper's avatar, Immortus, Kang settles into a more comfortable life, one that isn't even considered to be villainous in nature anymore. His job becomes to defend timelines from disruptive time travelers like his former self. But literally, his former self. He actually has to deal with himself from the past, teaming up with the Avengers to keep order across many timelines. At number 7, Kang once went by the moniker of the Scarlet Centurion. During the modern era, Kang felt he needed another disguise to try and dethrone the Avengers. So, in order to design a new persona, he looked back on his long history with Dr. Doom, who he first met in ancient Egypt as Pharaoh Rama Tut, mentioned earlier. Inspired by Dr. Doom's armor, Kang then went on to design his own suit and went by the mantle of Scarlet Centurion. This particular effort doesn't get him very far, but that could be due to the fact that he was facing off against the Avengers. Later, Kang's son Marcus takes up the role of Scarlet Centurion as well, which is just another little tidbit for you. At number 6 is the fact that Kang raised the Apocalypse Twins. This is a good example of how time travel can be a very powerful tool if used the right way. When Kang looked into the future, he saw that Uriel and Elman, aka the Apocalypse Twins, would eventually usurp him and get in the way of his own rule. So he kidnaps them as babies and raises them himself as a preventative measure. Luckily for the universe though, the twins escape Kang's grasp and try to establish their own rule. Later, it's revealed that Kang was also trying to prepare the Apocalypse Twins as weapons to wipe out all of mutant kind, a race of beings that Kang felt also threatened his rule altogether. Luckily, the uncanny Avengers take him out before the better part of this plan could be carried out. At number 5 is that Kang actually wielded the Reality Stone during the Infinity Wars storyline. In this storyline, another villain named Requiem is also trying to get the Infinity Stones to reduce the population by half. But instead of wiping out half of the population, Requiem decides to blend people together during a series of Infinity Warps, as they're called. Luckily, Loki is unaffected by this merge and goes around finding people to unmerge. One of those people is Kamala Kang, a mixture of Kang and Miss Marvel, and when they're split back to their normal selves, Kang the Conqueror takes control of the Reality Stone to go into battle against Devondra, who wielded the Soul Stone at the time. It's a pretty notable moment because Kang's powers are such that you might expect him to already have power comparable to the Reality Stone, so when he gets it, his power gets a massive boost. At number 4 is when Kang raises Black Bolt's son Ahura to wipe out the Inhumans. Another twisted case of Kang the Conqueror using his time travel to screw up other people's lives. This one is on another level than the previous entry because he actually turns, or tries to turn, son on father. which is pretty deplorable if you ask me. But something you might not expect is that Black Bolt actually sends his son Ahura to the past with Kang in order to save him from the events of Secret Wars. Kang does take Ahura to the past, but instead of protecting him, he trains him to turn against his own people and wipe out the Inhumans in the past. Ahura then grows up to be the new Kang the Conqueror as an adult, and the future Inhumans are then forced to kill him. This is a pretty twisted one, both in the sense that it's unfair to Ahura and Black Bolt and all the Inhumans, but also in the sense that it's just darn confusing. This must be why the MCU chose to avoid time travel, well, up until Endgame, I guess. At number 3 is that Kang the Conqueror appeared in Loki Season 1. This is something that some people may have missed because he goes by a different name in this show. Appearing as He Who Remains, the character is introduced as the ruler of the Time Variance Authority and exists at the very end of time. His job is to watch over any and all time traveling escapades to keep everything in line. This could be considered as the MCU's version of Immortus mentioned before in the earlier entry on this list, but speculation aside, this is in fact confirmed to be Kang. And why it's important to note is that Kang is about to become a huge player in the MCU, and this appearance will go down as the very first for this iconic character after we see him in more MCU projects over time. One of those projects is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which is confirmed to feature Kang the Conqueror as the main antagonist, and he will of course be played by the same actor as He Who Remains from Loki Season 1, Jonathan Majors. At number 2 is that a younger version of Kang became known as Iron Lad, the teen version of Iron Man. Yes, that's right, in Young Avengers, a past version of Kang appears as a teen Iron Man, and not only that, but he is seminal in the formation of the Young Avengers themselves. This heroic version of the villain has no idea of what he will become, but eventually gets a huge wake-up call when he is confronted by his future self as Kang the Conqueror. In this moment, the future Kang, the one we're most familiar with, returns to the past to inform Iron Lad of who he will become. But this confrontation does not go well, understandably, and Iron Lad actually kills Kang, who's his future self, thus creating a temporal paradox. This sort of screws things up a bit, as time travel typically does, but Iron Lad eventually travels forward in time and continues on his path to becoming Kang the Conqueror, setting the timeline back on track. Finally, at number 1 is that Kang's real name is Nathaniel Richards. Now, you may be scratching your head wondering why on earth I would rank this in the top spot, but the reason is that this suggests that Kang may be a descendant of Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic. Now, this ancestral link hasn't been confirmed, but Kang is typically known as a Fantastic Four villain, so it wouldn't be totally shocking if this were to turn out to be true. And to make things even more bizarre, other writers have explored the idea that Kang may be a descendant of Doctor Doom as well. I'm not sure how he'd be a descendant of both Doctor Doom and Mr. Fantastic, but there is a pretty widely discussed theory that this could be true. But either way, I think the most exciting thing about this fact is that writers are clearly not done with Kang in terms of the comics. The more backstory is added to the character, the more interesting he'll become, and that goes for all comic book characters. My guess is that they'll confirm this theory soon, sometimes between now and when the new Fantastic Four movie comes out, and they'll release it in the comics, and then Kang will be introduced to the MCU fans with more of an integrated backstory than he's ever had. But that's just a theory. We'll have to wait until 2025 to see if that actually happens. Alright, that was the list. Please leave a comment below and let me know if I missed any cool Kang the Conqueror facts. I think I got most of the interesting ones, but there's a lot out there. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I've been your host, Ben Ball. You know the rest.